After losing my memory, I somehow gained an alpha fiancé. Rumor had it he was arrogant, reckless, and absolutely despised arranged marriages, especially with a country bumpkin Omega like me. But as fate would have it, his face was exactly my type. I decided to take the initiative, darling, I'm carrying your baby. A few days into our newlyweds' life, his alpha younger brother, who had been sent away to Africa to build character, returned home and froze the moment he saw us. Bro, why are you holding my Omega fiancé? The pale, blinding glow of the hospital's fluorescent lights reflected a harsh halo in Edison's clear eyes. His memory had abruptly stopped at the age of 18, and right now, his best buddy Charles was gesturing wildly, fingers dancing in the air like he was weaving a spell, trying to piece together an incredibly melodramatic past. He explained how Edison had launched an inescapable romantic ambush on his wealthy fiancée, how he panicked and fled when his bluff was called, and how he ended up taking a nasty fall that resulted in a convenient case of amnesia. I don't buy it, Edison said, his face full of suspicion, refusing to believe a single word of this entirely illogical accusation. Charles put his hands on his hips in sheer frustration. You don't believe me? Look up the Gallo family yourself. The cool blue light of the tablet illuminated Edison's innocent, yet perfectly sculpted face. The first result to pop up on the search page was the 22-year-old heir to the Gallo family, Albert. The young man on the screen possessed an aggressive, striking, handsome look. He wore a coldly tailored suit, and his smooth, elongated neck was completely free of any distracting accessories, highlighting a sharp, youthful jawline that bore no trace of weariness. Amidst his aloof features, a single dark beauty mark rested just below the corner of his eye, adding an inescapable, fatal allure to his otherwise stoic and commanding presence. Edison stared blankly at the screen, his Adam's apple bobbing involuntarily as he swallowed hard. You never mentioned. He was this gorgeous. If I try that romantic ambush one more time, do you think I still have a shot? Charles rolled his eyes so hard it could have been recorded in history. Before he could fire back, a work call interrupted, and the poor guy instantly turned into a soulless zombie. His face went pale, and he practically scrambled out of the hospital room in a panic. The noisy background fell completely silent. Edison scrolled through his contacts, completely ignoring his pig-farming dad and chicken-feeding mom, and tapped his slender finger on the only name with a special note, Albert. He cleared his throat, put on a sickeningly sweet tone, and sent a voice message. Darling? Could you come pick me up from the hospital? He casually attached a teary-eyed teddy bear emoji. The typing indicator at the top of the chat box blinked a few times, and finally, a clean, crisp reply popped up on the screen. Okay. The hospital room door was pushed open abruptly, and the draft from the hallway sent the curtains billowing. Albert had arrived in a rush, a few strands of his usually flawless hair falling slightly over his strong brow bone. His perpetually stoic face now betrayed a suppressed, youthful sense of restless anxiety. How are you feeling? Albert took a long stride closer, his impeccably tailored suit trousers bringing a slight breeze with them. Edison didn't answer. His gaze was completely glued to Albert's thin lips. They looked a little dry, as if they desperately needed a shameless amnesiac to provide some lip balm services. In the brief second Edison zoned out, Albert leaned in, their noses barely inches apart. The air was immediately filled with Albert's minty pheromones, chilling to the bone, yet inexplicably addictive. Are your injuries still bothering you? Maybe you should stay a bit longer. No, I want to go home. Edison quickly grabbed Albert's arm and obediently leaned against his shoulder. Albert's body instantly stiffened. This isn't very appropriate. Instead of backing away, Edison tightened his grip on Albert's sharply suited forearm, burying his fluffy head deep into the man's broad shoulder. Tears instantly pooled in his eyes, hanging precariously on his eyelashes, but, "You're my fiancé. What's so inappropriate about it?" Albert's tall frame went rigid as iron, his breathing hitching for a second. His eyebrows knit together, and his thin lips parted slightly. Actually, you're my brother's. Ouch! My head hurts. Edison grabbed Albert's tie, throwing himself into his arms like a clingy octopus and acting completely spoiled. Albert sighed helplessly, reaching out with cool fingertips to gently massage Edison's temples. With every subtle movement of his knuckles, a sweet strawberry pheromone mingled with the mint, wrapping delicate threads around Albert's frosty, long fingers, effectively choking the explanation right back down his throat. In the back seat of the Maybach, The driver's terrified gaze darted wildly in the rearview mirror. Unable to stand the man's bewildered stares, Albert stated coldly, "Edison lost his memory." Meanwhile, Edison just assumed the driver was shocked to see two people who once hated each other's guts now pressed so seamlessly together. Back at the historic Gallo family estate, Edison stood in the high-ceilinged European-style grand hall, waving his hand grandly like a conquering king. "I want to share a room with Albert." The butler's jaw nearly shattered against the marble floor as he stammered, looking at Albert. "Young master, this isn't appropriate, is it? You're taking your brother's—" Albert coughed lightly, pulling his hand away from Edison. "My brother. Ah, my head. Just hearing that word makes my brain buzz." Edison covered his head in fake agony, secretly observing through the gaps between his fingers. Albert let out a sigh. "Never mind, it's fine. My room is on the second floor, on the right. I'm barely home anyway, so you can take it for now." The butler cast a knowing look, leaning in close to Albert to mutter under his breath, "If you ask me, the young master just doesn't want to hear about it." Infuriated yet amused by their misunderstanding, Albert lowered his head, his well-defined knuckles pinching Edison's soft, fleshy cheek in a petty act of revenge. "Don't regret this." As he leaned in, that minty scent drifted through the air once more. That cool sensation sent Edison's heart fluttering. He blinked his bright, sparkling eyes, smiling like a beautiful fox that had just tasted something incredibly sweet. However, the cohabitation plan was a complete disaster. If Edison woke up at 8, Albert had already vanished in the 7 o'clock morning light. If Edison woke up at 7, there were only taillights fading down the driveway at 6, and when Edison managed to wake up at 6, Albert simply packed his bags and flew overseas for back-to-back meetings. Even his plan to bond over pets went bankrupt when Albert let out an earth-shattering sneeze at a single cat hair floating in the air. The bright red X marks on his schedule were downright glaring. In the coffee shop, Edison pulled a long face, pouring his heart out to Charles. Charles slapped his thigh so hard the cups on the table rattled. "I remember your engagement has a 1-year limit. If neither side is happy after a year, the contract is automatically void." Edison's pupils shrank as reality hit him, his fingertips suddenly gripping the edge of his cup. "What am I supposed to do?" Charles lowered his voice, a sly, mischievous gleam in his eye typical of a chaotic best friend. "Seal the deal. If you're carrying his baby, getting married will just be the logical next step." Edison bit his lower lip hard, his white teeth leaving a pale mark on the rosy flesh. The strategy was far too risky, akin to walking a tightrope over a cliff. One slip up, and Albert's well-defined hands might just snap his neck. But remembering Albert's face and physique, a reckless, wild spark slowly ignited deep in Edison's eyes. Blue flames licked the bottom of the pan as Edison frantically plated 6 dishes and a soup. On the counter, the heavy-duty special powder, sponsored by his best buddy Charles, sat right next to a bag of ordinary flour. Just then, Gavin, the artsy younger brother with his rebellious curly hair, strutted into the kitchen, his chin practically pointed at the ceiling, spouting arrogant nonsense. The noise made Edison's head pound. With a flick of his wrist, he dumped a whole packet of white powder into the wine glass. Seeing the liquid instantly turn as cloudy as dirty dishwater, Edison guiltily averted his gaze, silently praying with clasped hands, "Please let Albert be blind." Gavin's arrogance didn't even last half an hour before Albert grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and tossed him out the front door. The warm dining room lights hit Albert's striking brow bone. His prominent fingers held the chopsticks, his gaze suddenly darkening. "You were staring at him just now. You haven't forgotten, Gavin. Did you remember something?" Edison immediately shook his head like a rattle drum. The tension in Albert's jaw visibly relaxed. He picked up the suspiciously cloudy glass, his Adam's apple rolling as he downed it without a second of hesitation. Edison swallowed hard, boldly reaching out a fingertip to wave it in front of Albert's eyes. "Albert, now. Hold me. Kiss me." Before he could finish, the temperature in the room plummeted. The minty scent instantly swallowed Edison's strawberry notes. The clarity in Albert's eyes faded, replaced by an aggressively dark, commanding magnetism. He cupped the back of Edison's head with one hand and pressed his lips down hard. The morning light peeked through the gaps in the floor to ceiling windows, making Edison squint. He felt like a broken rag doll, pinned firmly beneath the covers by a heavy, muscular arm. The phone buzzed on the pillow, and Charles' hushed voice came through the line. "How did the battle go?" Edison rubbed his aching lower back, his voice hoarse. Pretty good, except that powder turned the water completely cloudy. A violent coughing fit erupted over the phone. "Don't tell me you poured the flour in?" Edison's scalp prickled, and just as he tried to scramble out of bed on all fours, a large hand, marked with fresh scratches, accurately locked onto his ankle. Albert chuckled softly, and with a slight tug, dragged him right back into the deep mattress. The velvet blanket slipped, revealing the Alpha's broad back, where a crisscross of red marks looked shockingly intimate in the morning sun. Pinned down and unable to move, with an inescapable, powerful leg muscle pressing against his knee, Edison could only muster a cowardly fake smile. "It's all my fault for having flour in my brain. I should have stayed in the countryside and focused on pig farming instead of trying to trap a top-tier Alpha." The temperature in the room instantly dropped to freezing. Albert lowered his head, his cool lips brushing pitifully against the corner of Edison's mouth, the dark beauty mark under his eye radiating dangerous desire. "Edison, you've triggered my rut. You have to take responsibility." Edison extended a trembling finger in terror, pointing toward the nightstand. "I'll get you the suppressants." Clink. The last 2 glass vials were crushed by Albert's long fingers, rolling mercilessly onto the carpet and shattering into pieces. He cupped Edison's panicked little face, showering him with dense, overwhelming kisses. "How are you still so adorably clueless? For the next 7 days, we're going to take our time." And as for Gavin, Albert already reassigned him to an inspection tour in Africa yesterday. At noon on the 7th day, a disheveled figure took advantage of Albert stepping out for groceries, scrambling out of the villa wearing only a left slipper. Crouching by the curb, Edison clutched his phone, which was hanging on by 5% battery, listening to Charles passionately cursing out his Alpha boss on the other end. "I'm a virgin. Don't take a casual fling so seriously. Fire me if you have the guts." The 2 cowards who had caused massive disasters quickly met up, tossed their SIM cards, disconnected from the internet, and hid out like turtles in a rental apartment for 2 days. Once the storm seemed to pass, they hit it off and headed straight to a newly opened bar on the corner, aiming to celebrate their rebirth with a 9-2-person group voucher. However, the 6 special cocktails the bartender mistakenly delivered were not only stunningly colorful, but also packed an incredible punch. Deafening bass pounded mercilessly against their eardrums, while vibrant laser lights swept frantically across the dance floor. After downing 3 drinks, Edison's eyes grew hazy, his cheeks flushed a deep, ripe red. Stumbling through the crowd, his gaze suddenly locked onto a booth off to the side. Under the dazzling strobe lights, a man in a sharp suit was casually swirling his glass, chatting with a burly bodyguard beside him. That face was an 80% match for Albert's, but the jawline was even sharper, and a restrained, disdainful sneer played on his lips. Fueled by liquid courage, Edison strutted over proudly and slammed a thick stack of cash right against the man's chest muscles. "Keep me company for the night." The man paused slightly, his well-defined fingers slowly adjusting his rumpled tie, a hint of amusement flashing in his eyes. "My nights cost an absolute fortune. You'll have to pay more." Edison scoffed coldly, pulling 2 more massive stacks of bills from his jacket like a magic trick. "I've got plenty of money." The man's nonchalant expression finally shifted into utter disbelief, and he chuckled aloud. "Where on earth did you pull those 3 bricks from?" The alcohol had completely fried Edison's rationality. He giggled and pressed closer, his burning fingers popping the buttons of the man's crisp shirt, shamelessly squeezing the well-sculpted chest. "Not bad. Feels pretty similar to the ex I just dumped." The man's eyes darkened. He backhanded Edison's soft waist, locking him tightly into his burning embrace. He lowered his head slightly, his warm breath hitting Edison's slightly parted lips. "The hotel is already booked, just waiting for my sugar daddy to check in." Right at that moment, a distorted scream came from the direction of the restrooms. Charles' eyes were wide as saucers, pointing frantically at Edison as he hopped around anxiously. "Are you crazy? Why are you throwing yourself into the trap?" Before he could finish shouting, a pair of large hands reached out from behind. The smiling Alpha boss grabbed Charles by the wrist, pulled off his own tie, and tied it in a dead knot around him. Over the deafening music, a cornered Charles watched in despair as Edison foolishly giggled against the man's shoulder. Suddenly, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. Wait, this man in front of them is taller and more dangerous than the fiancé Edison described. Could the Gallo family have another, unrevealed young master? The morning sun pierced through the heavy hotel curtains, casting a harsh beam of light over the clothes scattered across the floor. Edison snapped his eyes open, soreness shooting through his entire body like an electric current. The moment he tried to get out of bed, his slender legs trembled violently like a dehydrated fish. The bizarre fragments of last night's dreams exploded in his mind that wasn't a stand-in at all. The texture of the muscles, the scorching temperature, it was all totally real. On the nightstand, a piece of white paper was casually pinned beneath a water glass. The bold, sprawling handwriting exuded a commanding domination. I'm away on a business trip for 2 weeks. Don't wander off. Stay put. When I get back, we're discussing our marriage. Albert fireworks practically exploded in Edison's brain. Last night was the real Albert. Before he could even process this earth-shattering revelation, his phone relayed Charles' raspy, zombie-like cry for help. Edison, come save me. The scene shifted rapidly. The blinding indicator lights at the airport, the howling wind on city seas winding mountain roads, and the pale fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway wove together into a chaotic blur of memories. Congratulations, sir. You're a little over a month pregnant. Remind your alpha to avoid strenuous exercise during the pregnancy. The elderly doctor pushed his reading glasses up his nose, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the price of groceries. Slumped in his chair, Charles looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. The hand holding the ultrasound report shook like a leaf in the wind as he pulled at his hair in a total breakdown. But I'm a beta. Betas can get pregnant too. Let's not discriminate against species. Standing nearby, Edison's eyes dilated in pure shock, but a brilliant, utterly absurd plan quickly took root and sprouted in his mind. In order to repay a debt of gratitude, he had been forced into the Gallo family's engagement by his elders. Even though he thirsted after Albert's godly looks, he was genuinely terrified of that barbaric, consuming intensity from last night. If he faked a pregnancy, wouldn't that buy him a whole year of peace and quiet? The two cowards, desperate to avoid having their fates controlled by alphas, instantly struck a deal. Charles would provide the data, and Edison would fake the pregnancy. A few days later, the warm yellow overhead lights of the villa's dining room spilled over the exquisite spread of 6 dishes and a soup. With a soft click, the door unlocked. Albert had come home early. He loosened his cold, stiff silk tie with one hand, his sharp suit carrying an edge of travel-worn fatigue. Surprisingly, he didn't interrogate Edison. His deep, dark eyes scanned the forged pregnancy report Edison had sent, and the faintest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. The air instantly cooled with a soothing hint of mint, like opening a window to snowy mountains in the middle of a sweltering summer. Albert's long fingers wrapped around Edison's hand, his cool lips gently pressing against his fingertips, his voice deep and magnetic. Since you're pregnant, get plenty of rest. I won't touch you. Edison was so thrilled his eyelashes fluttered wildly, surrounded by a visible, sweet pink haze of strawberry scent that securely wrapped up that biting chill. The fake pregnancy scandal caused the engagement to be fast-tracked at light speed. Inside the century-old Gallo family estate, the crystal chandeliers refracted a dazzling aura of luxury. Albert held Edison's hand tightly, their fingers intertwined. Edison sharply noticed a striking crimson stain bleeding through the collar of Albert's pristine white shirt. If Edison didn't like you, I would have taught you a severe lesson today. The old master raised his cane and brought it down heavily onto Albert's broad back. Albert let out a deeply suppressed grunt, his knees buckling slightly, almost dropping to the floor. But his sturdy back instantly arched into a protective stance, shielding Edison firmly behind him. Daunt hit him. Edison's eyes immediately turned red with anxiety as his fingertips dug into the hem of Albert's shirt. Albert gripped his hand back, his face pale but his eyes overflowing with tenderness. I'm fine. Today is our special day. The champagne tower reflected golden light as a massive 5-tier fondant cake was wheeled into the center of the hall. Holding Edison's hand, Albert had barely lowered the cake knife when the crowd erupted in cheers. Just then, the grand doors swung open. A tanned man with a slightly wild, mischievous smile strode right into the center of the spotlight. Bro, why didn't you tell me you were getting engaged? I heard the news from my buddies and rushed all the way here to bring a gift for you and my sister-in-law. Gavin's gaze swept casually over the crowd, but the second he saw Edison's face, he froze completely. The smile vanished from his lips, and a look of absurd bewilderment flashed through his eyes. Bro, why are you holding my fiancé? The hall dropped into a dead silence. It felt as if every breath in the room had been sucked away. Edison's pupils dilated rapidly as his brain felt like it had been struck by a heavy sledgehammer. Countless shattered memories wildly rewound and pieced themselves back together in his mind. No wonder Albert's initial attitude was so hot and cold. No wonder everyone looked at him so weirdly. The Gallo family had 2 sons, and from the very beginning, he had mistaken the calm, cold, and severe older brother for his own playboy fiancé. His ankles went weak, and losing his balance, Edison's slight frame crashed hard into the long table behind him. Crash! The towering pyramid of champagne glasses collapsed, sending countless shimmering shards of glass exploding outward like a rainstorm, reflecting the harsh lights. Edison. A flash of extreme terror crossed Albert's eyes as his massive frame lunged forward, desperately shielding him beneath his body. The wail of the ambulance sirens pierced the night sky. Opening his eyes again, Edison was met with the glaring white walls of a VIP hospital room. His memory was fully restored, and he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into and hide. He had absolutely zero affection for Gavin's explosive temper. Every time his fiancée was mentioned, his brain naturally summoned that refreshing minty scent and Albert's restrained, alluring face. He had single-handedly torn a massive hole in the sky. Footsteps approached. Like a startled ostrich, Edison yanked the pure white blanket over himself, covering himself up tight from head to toe. I remember everything. Edison's muffled, trembling voice came from beneath the covers. I mistook you for someone else. It was a mistake, a total misunderstanding. The corner of the blanket was ruthlessly ripped away by a large, well-defined hand. Albert stood by the bed, staring down at him with an imposing aura. His normally deep eyes had now frozen into a bottomless, icy pool, dropping the room's temperature to freezing point. Albert raised one eyebrow, a completely warmth-free sneer playing on his lips. Claiming me so boldly was a misunderstanding. Using me as a stand-in was a misunderstanding. We're already engaged, and now you're telling me you regret it? He leaned down, his slightly calloused palm pressing directly against Edison's flat stomach. The hand was searingly hot, creating an intensely dangerous contrast with the freezing air around them. And on top of that, you're carrying my child. Edison's brain short-circuited entirely. He bit his lower lip hard and forced out a sycophantic smile that was uglier than crying. Actually, I'm not pregnant at all. Someone else is. The smile on Albert's face instantly froze. The frost rapidly spreading through the air stalled for a second. But he quickly leaned in closer, his aggressive presence practically brushing against Edison's nose, his voice low, raspy, and dangerous. Right now everyone, including your parents, knows you're carrying my child. If you say you aren't, no one will believe you. Therefore, Albert's eyes went terrifyingly dark. We have no choice but to make it real. Edison gasped, but just as he was about to argue, the hospital room door burst open with a loud bang. Edison's parents rushed in, their faces glowing with sheer joy, holding up 2 fluffy baby onesies, one pink, one blue, grinning from ear to ear. Sweetie, which one do you like better? As long as you gave birth to them, Mom and Dad will love them. By the hospital bed, Edison and Albert just stared at each other. Edison closed his eyes in utter despair. In the cramped hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights flickered unsteadily. Charles gripped the thin ultrasound report, getting ready to make a run for it, when a well-defined hand shot out from an angle and snatched the paper away. The suit-clad alpha boss stood like a highly oppressive dark wall, blocking his path. The boss' lips curled into a sinister smirk, his fingers flicking the page. Pregnant? Whose is it? Charles stumbled back 3 steps in terror, his face scrunching up as he forced a gruesome smile. If I said it was Edison's, would you believe me? The scene switched back to the VIP room. Sunlight pierced through the blinds, casting a stark line of light and shadow across Albert's sharp profile. Sitting in the guest chair, his slender fingers gripped a silver fruit knife, the blade nimbly peeling an apple. A long, unbroken ribbon of peel dangled down, yet his dark, heavy gaze was locked dead onto Edison on the bed, his ears sharply picking up the sound leaking from the phone receiver. Edison felt his scalp tingle under that intense glare, his back practically burning from the stare. He bit his lower lip and forced out a dry remark into the phone. Could this baby actually be mine? Suddenly, Albert in the room and the alpha boss on the other end of the line both let out a synchronized, chilling sneer across space. What do you think? Edison squeezed his eyes shut in despair, silently lighting a candle in his heart for his best friend. A few days later, the caregiver in the room was replaced by his younger brother Gavin, who had just been released from his African exile. The two stared each other down, the air practically crackling with sparks. Time swiftly rewound to that noisy private booth in the bar. Under the colorful laser lights, a freshly arrived country boy Edison was wearing a waiter's vest, listening to Gavin spout arrogant insults about his country bumpkin fiancée. Pushed past his limits, Edison grabbed a liquor bottle from the table and landed a heavy blow straight to Gavin's forehead. However, just as he was fiercely marching toward the Gallo estate to break off the engagement, the grand doors opened, and Albert, freshly returned from abroad, stepped into view surrounded by cool moonlight. The high bridge of his nose, his ascetic, pale skin, and impeccably tailored suit left Edison utterly captivated. Cancel the engagement? What cancellation? He was locking this fiancé down for good. Thoughts snapped back to reality. Gavin rubbed the healed skin on his forehead, pointing at Edison in sheer exasperation. What kind of magic potion did you feed my brother? Don't get too smug. Hell dump you sooner or later. Edison rolled his eyes dramatically. Looking at Gavin's sun-baked, dark red African tan made his stomach churn. He leaned back lazily against the headboard, patted his perfectly flat stomach, and waved his phone around. See this? It's your little nephew. If you dare flap your lips again, I'm calling your brother right now. I hear the African branch still needs someone to supervise. That threat was like a strip of duct tape. Gavin, who had been throwing his weight around just a second ago, instantly shut his mouth. His face turned a ghastly pale as he turned around and began peeling apples and cracking walnuts through gritted teeth. At the grand wedding ceremony, the crystal chandeliers cast brilliant, scattered light. The doors opened, and Charles walked in, arm in arm with his alpha boss. The two were wearing matching, tailored haute couture suits, the silver patterns on their cuffs subtly announcing their relationship to the world. The boss' hand rested familiarly on the small of Charles' back. Edison held a glass of champagne, smiling as he clinked glasses with them. Next time, we'll be drinking at your wedding. Before Charles could even speak, the alpha boss pulled him directly into his arms, his tone impatient. It's about time you gave me a proper title. Any longer, and the kid will be old enough to run errands. Charles' cheeks immediately exploded into a fiery blush that spread all the way to his ears. He flusteredly punched his boss and hissed in a furious whisper, "Keep your voice down." In the bridal suite that night, Edison was aimlessly swiping on his tablet, the screen filled with tropical beach, honeymoon itineraries. With a click of the lock, Albert pushed the door open, smelling heavily of alcohol. His loosened tie hung askew over his exposed collarbone, and his usually frosty eyes were tinted with an intoxicated, flushed hue. He leaned over, planting both arms on either side of Edison, locking him completely within his embrace. His burning breath brushed against Edison's ear. "Wife, our baby should be over 2 months along by now. If you don't get pregnant soon, we really won't be able to cover up that previous lie." Edison's face instantly turned bright red. The alpha's pheromones in the room grew thicker and heavier. In response, Edison also began releasing his sweet strawberry scent. The two fragrances intertwined perfectly, feeling exactly like taking a huge bite out of a juicy strawberry slushie on a sweltering summer day. The camera quickly flashed to a scene of Gavin back in the estate study, tearing his hair out in pure frustration over mountains of transnational documents. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away on a private island, waves crashed against the reefs. By the floor-to-ceiling windows of the suite, Albert pressed Edison against the glass, demanding his attention endlessly. A few weeks later, on the white porcelain counter of the bathroom, a pregnancy test lay quietly, displaying 2 glaringly obvious red lines that were unmistakably clear under the brilliant tropical sun. 1 month later, on a rural dirt path, a private helicopter kicked up a storm of grass clippings, shattering the peace and quiet. The cabin door was violently shoved open. Albert's eyes were bloodshot with sheer panic as his expensive custom leather shoes stepped directly into the mud. He sprinted forward, grabbing Edison's wrist with a gaze that scanned him top to bottom, looking like it could burn a hole right through him. "Where does it hurt?" Looking totally clueless, Edison raised his arms and spun around like a clumsy top, revealing a coin-sized scrape on his knee. Seeing Albert drenched in sweat, his chest heaving violently, Edison flinched slightly and cautiously tested the waters. Mister, does my fiancé Gavin know that I'm pregnant? Albert's pupils constricted sharply. Along with that sentence, his heart audibly snapped cleanly in half. Edison had lost his memory again. Late that night, the hallways of the Gallo estate were completely dark. Albert's broad shoulders slumped pitifully. His towering, imposing frame now resembled an abandoned large dog as he stubbornly blocked the guest room door. Those dark eyes, which were normally sharp and severe, drooped pleadingly. Can we really not sleep together? Edison defensively pulled his pajama collar tight, sticking out one pale finger to ruthlessly draw a massive X across Albert's warm palm. Accompanied by the click of the guest room door locking, the air in the hallway completely froze into a block of miserable ice. Determined to uncover the supposed truth, Edison stormed straight into Charles' company. On the top floor of the Eats PBD office building, Edison's eyes went wide as saucers as he pointed at his best friend's highly swollen belly, roaring with full lung capacity. Didn't you swear on your life you'd never have kids? Since when did you grow such a massive tumor in your stomach? The sound of keyboards clacking across the entire office instantly died, and dozens of pairs of eyes swiveled over like searchlights. Charles was scared half to death. Clutching his belly, he yanked Edison forcefully into the break room. After hearing this surreal pregnancy gossip, Edison didn't hold back his rapid-fire critiques. Didn't you take a blood oath to end your boss bloodline? What do you call this? An undercover infiltration plot? Before he even finished speaking, an extremely dangerous dark shadow loomed behind the frosted glass door of the break room. The alpha boss, holding a coffee mug, pushed the door open through gritted teeth, a sneer plastered on his face. I heard everything. Edison, you're just a spy Albert sent to tear us apart. I've already called him to come collect you. A few days later, morning sunlight pierced through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom, and countless memory fragments rapidly pieced themselves back together in Edison's mind like a rewinding tape. He snapped his eyes open, fully awake. Not even bothering with slippers, he sprinted barefoot across the thick cashmere rug and back into the master bedroom. On the massive bed, Albert's sharp brow was furrowed tightly, carrying an unshakable exhaustion and insecurity even in his sleep. Edison carefully climbed into bed, his soft fingertips gently smoothing out that deep crease between Albert's brows. Then, he tilted his head and pressed a feather-light kiss to the man's sharp jawline. I remember everything now. And this time, I really won't forget again. The still air was instantly ripped apart by an overwhelmingly dominant aura. Albert's deep eyes snapped open, and without giving Edison even half a second to react, he flipped them over, his massive frame pinning Edison firmly deep into the soft mattress. The long, repressed frost surrounding him instantly boiled over, turning into searing, damp heat that overwhelmingly consumed Edison. Truth is, I've liked you for much, much longer than you ever realized. The camera fast forwards. A few months later, a loud baby's cry echoed through the estate. Wearing a punk leather jacket, the newly unexiled Gavin held a heavy motorcycle helmet in his left hand, while his right arm stiffly supported a pink swaddle bundle that was vigorously spitting up milk. The veins on his dark, sun-tanned face bulged out. Are you too sick in the head? Why do you only ever torment me? On a lounge chair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Edison leisurely crossed his legs, his hands firmly covering Albert's ears. They shared a knowing smile, perfectly content to tune out the frantic wails filling the room. The timeline suddenly snapped back to a year ago, at Gavin's chaotic engagement party. Amidst the reflections of the wine glasses, Albert laid eyes on his brother's rumored country bumpkin fiancée for the very first time. Beneath that seemingly innocent and beautiful exterior hid a pair of eyes as cunning as a fox. In that exact moment, Albert's knuckles tightened so hard he nearly crushed the crystal glass in his hand. To suppress the wildly growing, violent urge to steal his future brother-in-law, he had messily moved out of the family estate. That was, until one day, Edison's phone broke. Sitting in his massive, empty luxury apartment, Albert's long fingers swiped across the screen of a brand-new phone. With a dark, restrained gaze, he swiftly and cleanly deleted Gavin from the contacts list with a single tap. For this top-tier alpha, it was the darkest and most greedy act of romantic ambush he would ever commit in his life.
And that's where our story comes to a close. Edison is just absolutely adorable, candid, unapologetic, and vibrantly alive. He might look pretty and innocent, but he has an audaciously wild streak. Whenever he wants something, he goes right after it, completely indifferent to wealth and status. Albert may project a commanding, irresistible magnetism, but deep down, he is fiercely protective and tender. No matter what kind of epic mess Edison makes, Albert is always there in the background, quietly catching him when he falls. That pivotal scene in the bar, where a drunk Edison confidently slapped down 3 thick stacks of cash, righteously demanding to be Albert's sugar daddy, was totally absurd, yet so vividly endearing that it literally makes you laugh out loud. And Edison's best buddy, Charles, is incredibly lovable too. Those two are absolute partners in crime. It's no wonder they're such great friends. The entire story is so light-hearted and healing, leaving you feeling genuinely happy by the end. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the channel, because our next story is going to be even more amazing.